would like to welcome His Excellency, the First Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, as well as His Excellency, the UN Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, in his second country, Kuwait, and his assistants, the UNHCR and UN-OCHA representatives. Without further ado, I give the floor to our dear guest. Thank you. In the name of God, I would like to welcome all the representatives of local, Arab and international media and press. In the presence, patronage of His Highness Sheikh Sabah Al-Hamad Al-Jabir Al-Sabah, God preserve him, we concluded the second International Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Syria, Kuwait II. In the participation of 62 on the level of ministers of foreign affairs and ministers representing their countries, as well as 14 organizations and the specialized agency of the United Nations concerned in humanitarian and relief affairs, as well as 4 regional organizations. This conference is convened upon the second call launched by the United Nations in light of the deterioration of the humanitarian situation and the decrease of the availability of basic needs, as well as the widespread repercussions on the neighboring countries of Syria, especially in light of the increase of the refugees, the number of refugees in neighboring countries. We need to mobilize efforts to ensure the required financing and funding to support the United Nations and its specialized agencies and organizations and partners to respond and meet the basic needs of the Syrian population. In this context, we call upon the international community to work towards exerting efforts to face the repercussions of the Syrian crisis on the humanitarian level. We also call all parties in the conflict to facilitate the role and the work of international relief teams to deliver humanitarian aid, relief material to those who are impacted by the violence and continuous fighting in Syria. On this occasion, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to His Excellency, the UN Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, and his assistants, as well as all the committees that have worked to ensure the success of this conference. Finally, on behalf of Kuwait, I would like to extend my thanks and gratitude to all organizations, international, regional, government and non-government organizations for responding to this call and their participation in ensuring the success of this conference, where the total amount of pledges exceeded 2,400,000 US dollars. 2 billion, excuse me, and 400 million US dollars. Thank you for your attention.
Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Kuwait, ladies and gentlemen of the media, Assalamu alaikum. This second International Humanitarian Pledging Conference has just concluded by raising more than 2.4 billion US dollars for the Syrian Humanitarian Assistance Response Plan and the Refugee Response Plan over the next 6 months. Exact figure will be announced shortly. I express my heartfelt gratitude to His Highness Sheikh Sabah Al-Hamad Al-Sabah, the Emir of Kuwait. He has shown enormous generosity, leading the way with an inspiring contribution of $500 million I applaud his leadership. I'm also grateful to the many officials representing countries, international and non-international organizations, and humanitarian agencies. Their presence here shows a true spirit of global citizenship. The conflict in Syria is devastating communities across the country. It is spreading instability across the region. It requires action from leaders across the globe. I'm pleased that the world has spoken here in Kuwait City. We have said loudly and clearly to the Syrian people, you are not forgotten, and we have said loudly and clearly to the neighboring countries, you will not shoulder the burden alone. The United Nations will take the best use of the resources that we receive to provide food, water, shelter, emergency treatment, and other supplies and services to billions of people in need. We will focus attention on the needs of women. We will help fund the No Lost Generation initiative, which will help Syrian children to reclaim their childhood. And we will promote livelihoods for refugees so that they can work productively. The people of Syria long for peace. This is the message I heard from Syrian refugees I have met in neighboring countries. Yesterday, I went to Kawarko camp in the Kurdistan Governorate of Iraq. I spoke to a 14-year-old girl named Bahia. Like so many others, she lives in a tent with her family. She goes to UNICEF, supported classes. UNICEF-supported classes. She is eager to learn, but she has to cope with so much fear and uncertainty. I told her not to lose hope. We have to do everything possible to address the humanitarian, disarmament, and political dimensions of the conflict. Today, we achieved great progress on funding the relief effort. The joint OPCW-UN team is operating on a tight timeline to rid Syria of its chemical weapons. Next week in Geneva, we will convene the International Conference on Syria to press the parties to begin the political process, establish a transitional governing body, and stop the violence. The international community has responded generously at this present conference. Now, I call on all concerned to step up efforts to bring the parties together. Finally, I'd like to thank you again, all of your cooperation, and most importantly, the government and people of Kuwait, and leadership of His Highness Emir and His Excellency Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Kuwait. Kuwait has become a global humanitarian center. I really appreciate, and I urge all of us to work together with the United Nations to make this world better for all, including Syrian people. I thank you very much.
Thank you.
The plight of the Syrian refugees. My second question is to His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon. How do you assess and how do you comment on the results of this conference? Thank you. His Highness announced today during the conference participation and the contribution of Kuwait to the Syrian population, and it is a result of a government and popular pledge from the charitable and NGOs in Kuwait. These amounts will alleviate the suffering of our brothers in Syria, and as a response to the numerous calls made by specialized organizations and UN agencies working inside and in neighboring countries. and which assume an important responsibility in alleviating the suffering of the Syrian people. This pledge and contribution from the state of Kuwait falls under the role Kuwait plays on the humanitarian level. These amounts will be dedicated to alleviating the suffering of the Syrian population inside Syria and in neighboring countries through United Nations organizations and agencies.
Very much grateful for generous contributions and humanitarian contributions from many donor countries. The more than $2.4 billion, even though we do not have exact figure at this time, is an increase of $1 billion, almost $1 billion compared with last year. This reflects that the crisis and needs of the situation has increased. When we had the conference here last year, there were 4 million people who were affected, and there were 700,000 refugees. Now we have more than 3 million refugees in 5 neighboring countries, and almost half of population of Syrian people have been affected, including 6.5 million people who are displaced internally within Syria. This has created humanitarian crisis. We have to help them. There are so many people are dying, and they desperately need basic humanitarian necessities. Most of the basic infrastructures have been damaged, and 40% of hospitals are not functioning properly. It is only natural that the international community should send our warm helping hand. Of course, we may have to continue to expect the more help from international community. We have announced that we need at least $6.5 billion for this year. I hope this money will be used for first half or around that time. We will continue to appeal to member states of the United Nations for their generous support. At the same time, what is more important is that we must put an end to this violence through political dialogue, political negotiation. That's what we are going to begin next week. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That is a very important question. I really appreciate you raise the role of media. We are very grateful that many journalists have gone to Syria or neighboring countries trying to send out the exact messages, what is exactly happening on the ground. Without the help of media, we would not be able to see such a disastrous tragedy happening to Syrian people. Many journalists were victims in the course of all these very dangerous circumstances, and they were kidnapped, and they risked all these dangers. They have been connecting the world between Syria and the world, so that the world could react and respond, first of all, politically and humanitarian way, and also helping to protect human rights. I really appreciate it. I expect that media will play a greater role, so that people will have more awareness on this very, very dire situation. And I really appreciate your role. Thank you.
Thank you. Associate.
About the participation of Iran, we believe that Iranians participation is very important. However, unfortunately, as of this moment, we have not been able to finalize whether Iran should be participating or not. I have been very closely coordinating and consulting with the initiating parties, that is Russia and the United States. And there are still some difference of opinions on the exact role and the reason of their participation. Iran is a very important regional country. If and when there will be an agreement to establish transitional governing body with full executive powers, then we will have to get support and cooperation from Iranian government. For that, I will continue to discuss this matter. The invitation has already been sent. At this time, I'd like to urge opposition forces, Syrian National Coalition, to come with a coherent and unified delegation. We have not yet received a firm confirmation from them, and we do not have much time left. We have exactly 1 week left. But second part of your question, you should understand that there is a certain gap between the pledges and exact disbursement of funding. And even there is some gap between the money pledged as well as delivering the humanitarian assistance. The 70% or 80% of funding disbursement contribution is not too bad. I think it is quite good one, encouraging one, considering all these current situations. And I would expect that whatever has been pledged today would be remitted as soon as possible, so that United Nations humanitarian agencies and other agencies will be able to plan for the most effective and timely delivery of humanitarian assistance. For any detailed matters, I think I would like to ask Under Secretary General Valerie Amos to add.
If I may add, in relation to disbursement from last year, the figure is actually much higher than that. If you look at, for example, the amount that was pledged from the United